Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Erica Lai, president of APABA-DC, the Asian Pacific American Bar Association of the Greater Washington, D.C. area. Thank you very much for joining us for what will be the very last panel hosted by APABA-DC for the 2020 to 2021 year. This panel on diversifying the fight for justice. This panel is jointly hosted by 5 diverse bar associations from the DC area: My Bar, APABA-DC, CAMBA, the Capital Area Muslim Bar Association, GWAC, the Greater Washington Area Chapter, Women Lawyers Division of the National Bar Association, HBA-DC, the Hispanic Bar Association of the District of Columbia, and SABA-DC, the South Asian Bar Association of Washington, D.C. You may also have heard about the event through the several diverse bar associations, legal organizations, and law student organizations in the DC and New York areas that have helped spread the word. Thanks to all of these supporting organizations, as well as to APABA-DC Assistant VP for Community Affairs, Melissa Nanaka, for help organizing this panel. It is fitting that this is a joint event hosted by diverse bars that represent many different communities of color. For far too long, attorneys who have appeared before our highest courts and the judges on those courts have failed to reflect our communities of color. And this is especially true of women of color. Each year after the US Supreme Court term wraps up, the legal profession publishes stats on the still disproportionately low share of Supreme Court advocates from the past term who are women or people of color, let alone both. And this lack of representation matters, not only so that the justice system is seen to represent all of us, but also because representatives from our communities can advocate for us and understand the issues that affect us in unique ways. And decisions issued by our highest courts impact our daily lives and that of our communities. Over the next hour, we'll be talking with women of color who are not just experienced and successful appellate litigators, but ones who have chosen to dedicate their careers to expanding access to justice and civil rights for all of us, appellate attorneys who serve our communities through their work. I cannot think of a more fitting moderator to lead our discussion than Chaudhry Khan, founder and executive director of the Appellate Project, which aims to empower law students of color to thrive in the appellate field and continues to impress me with the impact it is already having in the months since its founding. For her work, Chaudhry is the very deserving recipient of APABA-DC's 2020 Community Appreciation Award. I'm thrilled to also introduce our speakers, whose bios I'll keep short so as to not eat away precious time from our panel. So you can read more about each of our speakers on our event page. Zainab Chaudhry is the principal court attorney at the New York State Court of Appeals and previously served for nearly 12 years as an assistant New York State Solicitor General. She has argued numerous appeals before all federal and state courts of appeals in New York, and her work has included several amicus briefs in the Muslim travel ban litigation. Carmen Iguina Gonzalez is a senior staff attorney at the ACLU Immigrant Rights Project and a former clerk to Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Her work on behalf of immigrants has included serving as counsel in the first case establishing the right to appointed legal representation for any group of immigrants facing deportation. Shilpa Satoskar is a supervising attorney in the Appellate Division of the Public Defender Service for the District of Columbia, where she has practiced since 2005. Prior to this, she spent several years as a civil rights litigator in Chicago and DC. Tiffany Wright co-directs Howard University School of Law's Civil Rights Clinic, where her work focuses primarily on civil rights cases in appellate courts. She also clerked for Justice Sotomayor. She served as a lead attorney in one of the only cases in which the Supreme Court has summarily reversed a grant of qualified immunity for law enforcement officers. Without further ado, I'll pass the virtual mic over to Chaudhry.
Thank you so much, Erica, and thank you everyone for joining us. I just wanted to give a special thanks to APABA-DC and especially Erica for spearheading this entire effort and getting us together. So I am super excited for this panel. As Erica mentioned, I run an organization called the Appellate Project, and we focus on empowering law students of color to do appellate work. So I'm often in conversations about diversity in the appellate field, and there's a lot of discussion about gender parity, which is still very bad in this space. But what's often unspoken in those conversations is, which women we're talking about. Women of color in particular remain grossly underrepresented in the appellate field. Just to give you an example of how bad this issue is, every year Chambers puts out its ranking of the top appellate attorneys. These are, the most prolific Supreme Court and appellate litigators who are frequently deciding cases of enormous magnitude in the appellate field. And if you look at it, 98% are white, the majority are male, and women of color are essentially not represented. And that's a huge issue because, like Erica said, our appellate courts are doing incredibly important work, right? There are no juries, so it's very unique. You have essentially a conversation between appellate attorneys and judges on what our laws mean and how they apply to all of us. And those decisions impact everything from our ability to vote, our healthcare, how we're policed, our education, immigration, you name it. So when those spaces don't reflect our communities, it has a direct impact on those conversations and the law that's produced. And so fortunately, we have 4 incredible women joining us today who are doing amazing appellate work and focusing on work that often impacts communities of color, including communities that they come from. So, I just want to jump right into it. I'm wondering if each of you could share briefly a bit about how you became interested in appellate work. How, was that something that you were thinking about, or when did it come up on your radar? And what specifically drew you to this area of practice? I'm going to start with Zainab, and then Tiffany, Carmen, and Shilpa, just going off who's on my screen.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. First, thanks to Erica and Javeria and all the bar associations for putting this panel together. It's an honor to be here with you. As far as how I became interested in appellate work, I was the first one in my family to go to law school, so I had no idea what I was getting into or what possibilities existed. Never heard of appellate practice before going to school. So I think my law school experiences really initially shaped that interest, starting from my legal writing courses, getting involved in moot courts, and then in my 3rd year interning with both a Second Circuit, Federal Court of Appeals judge and a state appellate division judge, our intermediate appellate court. And I think all of those experiences is from where I learned that I really loved appellate practice for, some of the reasons, Javeria, that you mentioned. It's really more academic. There's a lot of deep research and writing. There's more time to be deliberative and look at the law from a broader perspective. The courts that you're in are establishing precedent for your jurisdiction. It's where the law is being developed and evolving. So to me, that was really attractive about it, thinking about the broader public policy implications of my cases. And then I think too that the pace of it, I have been in very busy offices and into doing intense appellate litigation, but at the same time, it's a different pace of work than trial work might be, where you're always running into court constantly or chasing down witnesses and trying to get discovery sorted and all of that. And also just having the conversation with the judges. It's just such a rewarding part of the practice. And I think too, for me in my career, having had such a public service oriented background, that opportunity to work on cases with real statewide and even nationwide impact in the realm of public service has just been extremely, extremely meaningful to me.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really an honor to be here. I came to appellate work pretty organically. So I always knew that I wanted to be a lawyer. And after I graduated from college, I decided I would be a paralegal in a large law firm, get some experience while I studied for the LSAT. And I think I spent 2 days there before I decided that I hated everything about it and I didn't want to go to law school, and I just ran away for several years. And then found myself at the U.S. Attorney's Office, where I was a paralegal again, but in government, and really sort of fell in love with the practice of law. And the way things work there is there was no separation between trial lawyers and appellate lawyers. If you did the trial, you did the appeal. And so I went into law school not really understanding that there was sort of a separate practice area just for appeals. And I think it was my summer associate interview process where somebody I was interviewing with said, I think you should meet Judge Tatel. I think he would like you. He's a judge on the DC circuit. I had no idea who he was, and I wasn't planning to clerk. And I said, but I went along and I said, fine. And I ended up taking that job, working with that person who had suggested clerking to me, and discovered that there was a such thing as an appellate only practice. And what I loved about it was that it allowed, I thought it was better suited to the things that I am best at. So thinking, strategizing, writing things out, making sort of really complex things simpler in writing is a process that I really enjoyed. And also I found that as a woman at that time, I had a toddler, and that the pace of appellate practice was more suitable to me while I was raising my kids. There aren't really any appellate emergencies. I can, know what my deadlines are pretty far out. There aren't around the clock calls and meetings and discovery deadlines. And I just both fell in love with the work and what it allowed me to do with my family, and stuck with it. I think after clerking, I just immediately went into appellate practice and have just enjoyed being in the practice area because I think it's a great fit for how I like to work, and it allows me the flexibility I need to be with my family.
I'll jump in next. I just want to echo everyone's thanks. It's a huge honor to be here and to be sharing these experiences with this group. I think what attracted me to appellate work, and I will say my practice is mixed. I went into law school wanting to, what attracted me to law was the ability to work at the system-wide level, right? So take an issue and really think about how you can tweak the circumstances, how you can tweak how the law is applied so that it sort of trickles down and really affects more than that one individual case, but has an impact for everyone who sort of interacts with the system. And really for the reasons that I think Zainab talked about, that a lot of that happens at the appellate level. It certainly starts at the district court, right? And I think my practice is a bit of like building that record so that eventually you get there. But the appellate courts is really where, you settle the precedent and make sure that that's, applied for your entire jurisdiction. And I think, similar to my other two panelists, I think it fits my personality a little bit better. I've have colleagues who just love the trial work, right? They just feed off of it and are energized by, being in the courtroom and the last minute nature of that work. And that is exciting. And I do enjoy aspects of it, but I am much better suited for, sitting down and having those like long conversations about what if we tweak this argument slightly, or, change the structure of this brief so that we start with this and then end with this more impactful thing. So I think it's sort of what you're hoping to accomplish, but also it's a very personal decision. And I think ultimately it was a combination of both those things that sort of leads me to want to continue to work in this space.
Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. I'm also really excited to be here and also to hear from all the other wonderful panelists. And thank you, Javaria and Erica. I have always loved writing, even before I went to law school. And I think that sort of laid the groundwork for my eventual appellate work. But I didn't start out doing solely appellate work. My first few years practicing were, like Carmen said, a mix of trial and appellate work. And I just found over time that the assignments and the things that I really loved working on the most were the intense writing assignments. So I really liked writing appellate briefs. I really liked writing dispositive motions in the trial court that are, more like appellate briefs. I loved doing arguments when I got a chance to do them. And as others have said, the pace, I think, of appellate work suits me better. The nature of the work, I love to deal with legal issues in depth and, hone my arguments in writing, and also, through moot courts, hone my oral advocacy along with my colleagues. I just love all of that stuff more than I loved developing the facts and, interviewing witnesses and that type of thing, getting discovery. So yeah, so that's how I got into it. I didn't start out, but given over time what I learned about what I preferred, I decided to change jobs and go into a job where I can do solely appellate work.
Shilpa, I want to follow up on that last point. So you mentioned sort of switching from trial work to going into appellate work. And I'm curious if there were any mentors or people who are kind of influential in that process. You know, one thing that's so critical for anybody in this space is to have good mentors. And one of the challenges of being a woman of color is that there's so few people who share your background, and it can make it more challenging to find mentors. So I'm wondering if, you know, if everyone could share a bit, maybe start with Shilpa, on who your formative mentors were, and, you know, what makes a meaningful mentorship, and anything you'd recommend to students or young attorneys kind of facing a similar journey.
Sure. I don't know that I've had formal long-term mentors, but I've definitely had women, especially in various jobs, who I really related to and that I could turn to for advice, and that gave me a lot of good career advice starting out. You know, I think that my career, I was able to go on the trajectory I have because very early on, actually during one of my summer jobs at the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, I got advice from one of the attorneys there about, you know, don't worry about going on an exact path that everyone else goes on. It's okay to try different things and, you know, get skills from different jobs and then use them all together in, you know, whatever you eventually find that is perfect for you. And that was one person that really helped me a lot. And in my first sort of real non-summer job after my clerkship, and my judge, I clerked for a female U.S. District Court judge, and she was a mentor to me. And then in my first job too, there was just, I worked at a law firm for a few years, and there was a woman there who was a partner who really, you know, helped me get good assignments. It taught me a lot about writing and how to navigate appellate work, and that was really helpful too.
Tiffany, you mentioned, someone mentioned to you Judge Tatel, and then clerking for Judge Tatel, and then I know that led to other clerkships as well. You know, what was the process for you in kind of cultivating mentorship and finding it? That often it's very organic, but how did you kind of find the people to help you along the way?
So I think you're right. It has been organic, and sometimes, you know, being a first generation college graduate, really, no one in my family had gone to college. I didn't recognize when people were trying to form those relationships with me. And so it took me a while to figure out like what was, I remember there was a partner at that first law firm I worked with, and he kept inviting me to client meetings. And I was like, why is this guy inviting me to these meetings with these people that I don't know? And I didn't recognize, you know, what he was trying to do was, you know, build a relationship and teach me how to interact with clients. And over time, though, I just think I've been so really blessed that, and in almost every job I've had, I've run into someone who, you know, will pull me aside and give me advice when I needed it, give me like tough love when I needed it. I think my biggest mentors since I graduated law school have been the judges that I clerked for. I am incredibly lucky to have clerked for 3, not just great judges, but good people who I know I can go to for advice. I know I can go to with really difficult situations. In fact, when I've run into tough spots in practice, I generally go to my judges and say, hey, here's what's happening. And they normally are so wise and can like stop me from doing some awful thing that I'm about to do and tell me like this is a better course. So I think it's organic. I think you also sort of have to be willing. There have also been times when I just see someone out there that I respect and admire, and I'll just send a cold email and say, hey, can we get coffee? Can we talk? You know, Zoom is amazing. Actually, the pandemic is like great for this because people who are across the country where we never would have been able to really talk face to face before, I'll send emails and say, I really respect your work. I'd like to learn a bit more about what you do. And people are normally really receptive to that. So I think it's a mixture. For me, it has been a mixture of organic relationships, and then me trying to take the initiative to identify and build meaningful mentorships with folks.
Just jump in there to piggyback onto that point, Tiffany, which is, you know, my process too was quite organic in terms of having mentors, and maybe that's a process of our generation. You know, we didn't have the resources that law students and young attorneys have now. You know, all these wonderful bar associations, at least I didn't know about them if they existed, and they certainly didn't exist in upstate New York at that time. So, you know, there really wasn't any place I felt like I belonged where one could network, but now those things are out there. And so I certainly hope that students and young attorneys are taking advantage of that, of Zoom, of social media, of all the connectedness that we have now that, you know, Tiffany, Carmen, Shilpa, and I didn't have necessarily early on in our career. The Appellate Project, I think Javaria, right, she may mention this later, has a mentoring program that's more formal. But I think for most of my career, I didn't have anybody specifically in my background as a mentor, but I also clerked like our other three panelists. And, you know, my judge, who was on the New York Court of Appeals, which is where I am now, it's sort of funny coming back to the mothership in a way, but that's our state's high court. And, you know, just spending time with him, and till to this day, you know, 20 plus years later, I don't make a career move without talking to him. I don't, you know, there's so much that he gave to me in terms of time and mentorship, and just watching him be a judge and what, you know, real professionalism is. So that was very formative. And just a note for your list for the listeners here, you know, of course, it's wonderful if you find someone with your same background who can share some experiences and connect to you on a different kind of level. But this judge I had was the most opposite of my background. You know, he was an older white male Republican from Western New York in a really rural area. I mean, you just couldn't get more different. But he was so open to me and my community and what was different about us and what connected us and what we shared. And it was just such a beautiful relationship. So I encourage you to, you know, not limit yourself to looking to mentors that maybe only are from your background, you know, really be open to wherever you might find someone. And also, I think for me, the New York Solicitor General, you know, having worked in her office, that's Barbara Underwood, for over 12 years, that's where I grew up, from a baby attorney just coming off a clerkship and really growing, you know, into a grown-up attorney. And she was and has been such a trailblazer in her career that looking at her and all the firsts that she accomplished was really inspiring. One other thing I really think is important in terms of developing these relationships is that it takes time and trust from both sides, right? I mean, you want to know and understand your mentor and trust them in terms of how they're guiding you or advising you, but it works the other way too. You know, you don't want your mentor to feel like they're wasting time with you. And that's only become apparent to me now at this stage in my career, where I've had young women that I've talked to. And, you know, I'm not saying that a mentee has to 100% listen to everything their mentor says and do that. But, you know, I've had experiences where people have asked me to either connect them to someone or, you know, help them look at a job opportunity, but then there's not follow through, or there's something that I feel happens that's negative, and I feel like I may have jeopardized my relationship with my contact, you know. So it's also from the perspective of the mentor, you want to know that the person who's seeking your advice is serious and, you know, going to be taking what you advise seriously or protecting those relationships. So I think it goes both ways, and I think that just takes time. So even if you are meeting someone at networking events and bar association events, you know, try to cultivate that relationship for the time in the future when you do need advice.
And if I can just add very quickly, to echo, I think what has been said, I also was very privileged to have clerked for judges who have been amazing mentors, and I as well do not make a career move without, you know, consulting one or several of them. I will also say that in addition to, my first boss at the ACLU of Southern California, still a mentor, and I still reach out to him anytime I, have either, questions about my career or even questions about sort of, complicated legal issues. I also turn to my colleagues. I think often we think that a mentor has to be someone who, is like so much more senior and so much more experienced. And of course you want to have those relationships, and you want to, to have someone who's sort of been through it to tell you what it's like and what you can do and open doors for you. But I lean on, particularly when we're talking about trying to find other women of color and other women of color in like appellate spaces or social justice. It's not that many of us. And so having these, spaces with peers where we can, say, hey, Tiffany, like, how did you sort of navigate this particular situation? I'm finding myself sort of struggling with this as well. Can you give me any tips? My co-clerks, like we still, from every level, like stay in touch and talk again about, life and career and, future. So I would sort of encourage you to think past what you think of a formal sort of mentor-mentee relationship is, and also reach out to co-clerks, peers, law school, friends, and lean on them as well.
Great points. I just want to remind everyone we're going to have time for Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. So Carmen, if I could go back to that last point you mentioned, one of the challenges that, people of color and particularly women of color face as being the only is imposter syndrome. And, it can manifest in many ways, and there are so many reasons for it. Women of color are often told, you're too quiet, you're too loud, you're too smart, you're not smart enough, that wasn't a good idea. And then someone else says it and it's a great idea. I think we've all been there. And there's a recent Harvard Business Review article that kind of made the rounds called Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome. And I just want to briefly quote a piece from the authors, which they both argue that, quote, imposter syndrome puts the blame on individuals without accounting for the historical and cultural contexts that are foundational to how it manifests in both women of color and white women. Imposter syndrome directs our view towards fixing women at work instead of fixing the places where women work. You mentioned, the importance of having community and your peers and sort of building on that, and how that's something that's helped you navigate your career. I'm curious if you could share, why do you think imposter syndrome remains so prevalent, and what can be done on, as a woman of color, but also, those around us to address it, and would love other folks to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts sort of early on, right? It starts in law school, and or, even before that, right? It starts in college, like early life, like high school. But as a lawyer, certainly I felt it very strongly starting in law school, where I felt like my contributions were not sort of valued similarly as contributions from some of my white peers or male peers. And it continues to today. So on team meetings where, even if I'm leading a team, I'm leading a case, I see other attorneys sort of turning to, the male attorney on the group to see like, what are your thoughts on this, or defer to like, the white attorneys as to decision-making, even if we're saying the same thing, right? Or even if those attorneys have said it very clear, like we're deferring to Carmen on this, it's still they navigate. And it really, I read that article and identified with it. Yes, like absolutely, it eats at you. It continues to, you feel like you're asserting yourself, and I'm finally doing this, and then they keep trying to, do these little things to tear you down. And I think that, for me, it's been really important to speak up when that happens, and have someone that will, sometimes if it's just validate, like, yes, I saw that happening, like I will speak up next time, and have that person do that, or back you up if you decide to speak up. That's really important. And going back to what I mentioned about leaning on my peers and leaning on colleagues, this is just one example, but at a previous job that I had, there was this sort of practice of whenever there was a victory in a case or, something good had happened, there would be sort of this email string of like, oh, congratulations, amazing work. And I noticed, and I think a lot of people in the office noticed, particularly women and particularly women of color, that when someone would get singled out, be like, amazing work, X person, it was often a man, it was often a white colleague. And whenever it was sort of the success of, for example, my success, it would be like, great job, team. And so we sort of talked about it. We had the space where that was validated. Like, yes, you're not crazy. I see that happening too. And I think that was really important. But then we thought about a way to fix it. And we said, you know what, next time that happens, I'm going to send an email and say, great job, X person on this particular achievement. And really start having each other's backs. And that's, I think that helped. It was a small step, but I think it helped everyone sort of feel like I'm being seen, and started changing the culture in the office to say, every time you're acknowledging an accomplishment, acknowledge the person, so that you're doing it consistently. So yeah, I will say I absolutely identified with the article. And I think one of the things that, workplaces can start doing is creating, safe spaces for young attorneys, for female attorneys, women of color to, connect, to be able to talk freely about these issues and to think about ways to make it better, and then have the management be open to their suggestions and changes so that you can, start making a little bit of progress.
I'll jump in. Carmen, what you talked about made me think of a whole bunch of different things, but I'll start with just saying that I think, for me at least, a lot of the imposter syndrome for us comes from just a lack of representation. Like Carmen said, I mean, in law school, I had this idea, and this still exists, as Juvaria pointed out with the statistics, that an appellate lawyer, or like a really, top-notch sort of brainy lawyer, is a white guy. And that's who I saw doing this kind of work. And so I think that just seeps into your head, even though you may not, you don't agree with it, obviously, and intellectually, you might feel like you are no different. It just seeps into your subconscious. And I think one thing that can really help is, again, as Carmen said, just having the support of colleagues, whether they are also people of color or women or not, can help tremendously. And I think that can also help tremendously when what I have found over the years is in different jobs, there's been different levels of support and feeling included. And in my current job, I feel very included in the office for the most part. And there are always some issues, right, in every office, but where I feel the issues more and feel that kind of imposter syndrome is when I go out from the office to do the work. For example, in the last few years, we do almost all of our arguments before the DC Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in DC. And, we're a repeat player. So we have, the judges know us, they trust us, they respect us, we see them a lot. And even so, maybe I had argued over 20, 30 cases by this point. And one of the judges on the court, when I stood up, when she asked me to stand up to do my argument, kind of stumbled over my last name and finally was like, oh, I just can't say your last name. I'm just going to call you Miss Shilpa. And it was just, this is right as I'm standing up to do my argument. So you can imagine how that kind of threw me off, and I had to quickly snap out of it and just try to forget it. But then when it was over, I just felt sick about it. And, there weren't that many people that I work with who could really relate to that very specific experience, but just having somebody to vent to and somebody else to say, my God, I cannot believe she said that. That is so unprofessional and, racist and inappropriate. Even just that kind of support is helpful. Like Carmen said, to know that you're not crazy. So I would say it's a very common feeling, I think, that many of us feel, and try to get the support wherever you can from your peers, your friends, anyone.
Yeah, I think it's important. I love these conversations because I feel like the validation is so important. I think we often practice in our own areas, in our own workspaces, and you have these experiences. And after a while, you may start to actually feel like maybe it's me, maybe it's like, but having these conversations where people are authentic and open, I think is so important. And I love that article because I also agree that like the framing of imposter syndrome has often been, well, you feel this way. And yes, it's because of representation and you don't see anyone like you. But it's also because like this is the message that we are not as qualified is sent to us in many different ways as we go through and navigate our practice. You know, I have been told that I was hired to clerk on the Supreme Court because I'm Black and I share demographics with my justice. I've been asked, you know, why don't we just have genetic studies of genetically whether or not Black people are less inferior? I've been told that partners only love your work because they want to promote diversity. And all of these things, I think over time, start to eat away at your confidence. And you really have to do some work. And I think connecting with your peers and finding allies is so important, but also just sort of cleansing your mind, right, of these messages that you're constantly getting becomes so critical. And so what I've done, and it took me many, many years to figure out that this is what works for me, and it may not work for everyone, is like, I figured out that I have to stop those messages from even penetrating at all. And so when it happens, no matter how uncomfortable it is, I confront it. And so I recently had someone, you know, before the pandemic, I'm dressed in a suit, I show up at a place and they're like, oh, well, you know, what attorney are you with? As if I'm not an attorney. And so I asked them, like, what made you make that assumption? What is it about me dressed in my suit here in this professional place that made you make that? So I'm putting it back on that person. So I don't walk away from that encounter with the baggage of, oh, like, what did I do? No, that was a racist and wrong assumption that they made. And you have to confront that. Let them walk away and feel bad about that interaction. But yes, I agree with everything that's been said. You got to find allies. You got to be really thoughtful about where you go work. Earlier in my career, I went to some places that weren't great because I didn't listen to my gut and like people around me. So you have to be a little bit more discerning. And you know, these things are really difficult, but I think that there is a community of us out there where, you know, hopefully we can lean on each other and help each other through these interactions.
Just quickly, I just echo everything that has been said on this subject, from, you know, the systemic change that's needed and you know, the allyship that we need to foster. And Tiffany, what you were saying really resonated with me. You know, in terms of personally how I deal with it, at first, let me say I've been very, very blessed. I've worked with wonderful employers, and I really, within my offices, don't feel like I have had to deal with that so directly. But like Shilpa said, it happens when I go outside of that sphere into court or into wherever other conversations that I may be having. But, you know, I try to turn off that narrative too as soon as it starts spiraling through you, and try to think about, you know, others who might be in your position that don't look like you, but look like the typical person in that position. You know, that they thinking about them having obtained those goals or being in those positions, but perhaps being less qualified than yourself. And just reminding yourself that they thought they deserved it, they acted like they deserved it, and, you know, so do I. And instead of asking myself the question, why me? Why am I in this position? I don't deserve it. I really changed my thought process to be, why not me? You know, I deserve to be in this space. And just that subtle thing. I mean, it doesn't happen overnight, but the more you tell yourself that, you just create these tracks in your mind to go there. And then just to mention too, this is, you know, just sort of a side point, but it may resonate with some of the people listening today. Just speaking from my own South Asian background, and you know, there's this cultural aspect to being, you know, not putting yourself out there, not self-promoting. You know, you've got to be humble. And so I grew up like that. It doesn't even occur to you that you could be in the forefront, or that you could be, you know, a judge or whatever it is, you know, that you're worthy of reaching whatever professional goal you have. And so that's been something I've struggled with personally. again, just over time, and as you gain your confidence and your skills, I don't feel that so much anymore. But I just mention it in case anyone is also sort of struggling with those things. And I, just say, just try your best to muster all the confidence you can despite that, and just put yourself out there. And, my main message is don't self-select or self-censor yourself from putting in for positions or being out there, because that's something I was doing for a long time.
I see a lot of nodding heads, so many great points. And I think, there's this idea of you work hard and the work speaks for itself. And, sometimes you do have to be your own advocate and call out something when it's not right. There's a comment in the chat I just wanted to highlight that's, talking about this discussion and the corollary of this need to be perfect. And I'm curious if any of you guys have thoughts on that, which is this need to be perfect, make the perfect argument, write the perfect decision, be on everyone's good side, etc. Have you experienced this? It adds such an unnecessary pressure to the pressure that already exists as a practicing attorney. If anyone has thoughts on that, would love to hear, how you've navigated that.
I mean, I can jump in very quickly and say absolutely, right? The number of times that I've been in a meeting and thought about something, an idea, a way to frame an argument, and I held it back because I wasn't entirely sure and I hadn't done all the research. And then, a white male colleague jumps in and everyone's like, oh, that's absolutely brilliant. And I think over time, I've just started to let go of that a little bit. I think, a little bit what Zainab was saying, that just start shifting, the way that you think from, oh, I'm not good enough, my idea's not good enough, I need to vet it before I offer it, or otherwise everyone's going to think I'm a fool. And then just start, putting it out, just basically putting my ideas out there a little bit more and just taking more risks. But it's taken time. And I don't have sort of a magic solution for younger attorneys who might not have, had, I feel like I can say, well, my work has spoken for itself in the past, so I can now, feel more comfortable taking these risks. And I think that's how I've gotten comfortable with doing that. And absent that, I don't know that, coming out of law school, I would have sort of felt the same empowerment, other than to say that start thinking it, and hopefully slowly you will start getting more comfortable with just being confident in your own work, and knowing that you don't have to be perfect to be successful. That this is what practicing law is. This is why you have colleagues. That's why you have a meeting, right? That's the purpose of those spaces, is to sort of brainstorm ideas. So yeah, I would love to hear what my fellow panelists have to say about that.
So first of all, I think that's something that all of us probably struggle with. I think for me, it started with like my grandma telling me that you don't get to make mistakes. When you are Black and you show up in spaces where people don't look like you, like the standard is perfection. And I understand why she told me that. But I think it was harmful because like I was just actually laughing with my parents this weekend. I remember in my clerkship very early on, I wrote a memo, and I think I was trying to say through, THROUGH, but I wrote through, THREW. And to this day, like that was like almost 10 years ago, I still like break out in a cold sweat when I think about the fact that I made that mistake. And like, that's insane. Mistakes happen. Like nobody is perfect. And I think you're right, Carmen. I started to feel a little bit free when I realized, first of all, everybody makes mistakes. And secondly, when you're in these meetings and people are just talking about their thoughts, I used to do the same thing. I would sit in the meetings and I wouldn't say anything. I'm having thoughts, but I felt like I'm not really sure. I want to go research first before I throw that out there. Then I realized nobody in those meetings knows what they're talking about. Like everybody is like throwing out ideas and nobody has, researched it down to like the perfect case. And you just have to constantly tell yourself, one, you know, everybody is it's the practice of law, right? We're all learning as we go. Nobody's perfect. And you just have to, I really try, and it's so hard. And I agree. I don't think I could have done it straight out of law school, but now I think I've gotten to a place where I, you know, tell myself that my ideas are deserving of at least being talked about. I have worked for so long. I know a little bit about what I'm talking about at this point. And so why not throw it out there? And so, but it's so hard to free yourself from that, because for so many of us, I think it like goes back to childhood, you know, being told that like the standard really is perfection and you can't really afford to make mistakes. But, you know, I think like constantly validating yourself and telling yourself that you can do this can be really helpful.
Yeah, I relate to everything you all are saying. I mean, I think it's a really good point, Tiffany, that it starts when we're kids for many of us. I mean, I think for lawyers generally, there's probably a very high percentage of perfectionists who end up being lawyers. But I think our backgrounds do have an impact on that as well. I mean, I remember my dad telling me from a young age, like, you know, immigrants or, you know, people like us have to be twice as good as the local people, he would call them, you know, to get to the same place. And like Tiffany said, yes, there is some truth and it's important to keep that in mind, but it can also, it puts so much more pressure on us than we already put on ourselves. And I will echo what the two of you said, that this was a much worse problem for me in the first few years when I was an attorney. It has gotten somewhat better over time, but it took time. And I think that's normal. I think it happens to probably the majority of us. And so just give it time, believe in yourself, surround yourself with people who will lift you up. And I think part of the reason it takes time is I think that the longer you practice, the more you also see, you can see the level of other people's practice, whether it's your colleagues or like your opposing counsel or, you know, other people, other lawyers that you encounter, and you start realizing, oh, not only is that person not a perfect lawyer, but they're like either, you know, they wrote a really bad brief, or they, you know, they really did not say what I would have said in this argument. And there are just different ways that you start to, I think, slowly overcome those feelings.
Just quickly to add, oh, where's my Zoom screen? Here we go. Just quickly to add to what everyone said, I 100% agree with everybody and have had those same experiences. And I too feel a lot of pressure, even now. And now I'm not practicing, I'm in the court system, but when I would go to court, not only do I feel like I have to be perfect, but I feel like I'm representing every single Muslim woman who wears a hijab. And that itself is a lot of pressure. And I know I've had experiences where people don't think I can even speak English, and you know, and I've had to just dispel some even really basic things starting from law school. So it's definitely true that it's there. It takes time, and I wholly agree with all the other participants on how to cope with that and how it can improve over time. The only thing I would add is, you know, if it does happen that you make a mistake, and I think about, you know, like Tiffany said, I think about even little mistakes like that are so inconsequential. I think about them for days and days. And it certainly maybe does go to the personality of a lot of lawyers, or their type A perfectionist, you know, personality. But, you know, trying, if it's a real mistake, thinking about that and what you can do next time to improve it. And particularly for appellate lawyers, there's a saying, especially for, you know, when you're going to oral argument, there's the argument you want to give, the argument you gave, and the one you wish you gave. You know, there's always something to be learned from anything that you don't do well or that you've made a little slip up on. And so take the opportunity, if there is indeed a mistake, you know, to learn from that as you go forward in your career.
So we have just a few minutes left and a number of questions. So I'm gonna make this section lightning round and try and get through as many of these as I can. So We have a couple questions about networking. So one is, I love Zainab's point about following through after asking mentors for advice. Networking seems more important in our profession than I thought, not just for finding jobs, but also when thinking about cases, bringing cases collaboratively, finding amicus counsel, etc. Could anyone share more do's and don'ts about networking that can keep it authentic, particularly with an eye toward networking for collaboration in appellate litigation? And relatedly, I just want to throw in, someone wrote, I think culturally as a Latina, because I wasn't taught or raised to network in the workspace or LinkedIn, I have a hard time reaching out. Sometimes I feel like it is asking too much of professionals and practicing attorneys, even though it might not be such a big ask to them. So, forming those networking relationships, both initially and then doing it in a way that feels authentic. Does anyone want to comment on those points?
I mean, I'll just say, addressing the second point, I feel similarly. I certainly did at the beginning of my career. I was that person who sort of lingered awkwardly at like a table by herself at networking events. I'm just terrible at them. I was never taught how to do that. And I still am not really that comfortable. I think I agree with Tiffany, like this new world of Zoom and just sending someone an email and saying like, can you, do you have like 30 minutes for a quick chat about, this particular thing you're doing, or like how you got to be where you are right now. I just sent one of those emails last night. I mean, and the way I started thinking about it is, what's the worst that could happen? I mean, they don't respond, that's fine. You send a follow-up. If they don't respond again, then you just move on to the next, move on to someone else. Like that person didn't have time didn't see my email, like something happened that they just couldn't get to me, and that's okay. Like it's not going to be a disaster if it doesn't happen. And then if it does, you have those 30 minutes to connect with someone and ask them the questions that you were hoping to ask them. And certainly, I think, like Zainab said, like follow up, send a thank you email. Like the number of times I've done these and people don't send a follow-up like thank you email, I think it's like a small courtesy and it means a lot. And the people who do send that email like stand out to me later on when they reach out again. So I don't have a lot that I advise to give in terms of like how to train yourself to be better at networking, because I'm still terrible at it, other than to say like lean on this sort of new world of Zoom and technology and LinkedIn and just send that message, and if and see what happens.
If I could just quick add, I feel like lawyers love talking about themselves. So I think almost everybody you contact would be more than happy to share their experiences with you. And then just in terms of networking generally, I would say, I may have touched on this earlier, but try to build those relationships, as you sort of in your daily life, or going to events regularly and connecting and seeing the same people if you go to the next event, before you really need them for advice, or before you need them for a collaborative proposal that you have with them, but that you've just built this relationship of trust and camaraderie already, that it makes it easier to do something of a bigger ask, more than just, I want to talk to you about your career, but where you're really looking for something more specific.
Shilpa, this next question may be a good one for you. Do you have any suggestions or advice for mid-career attorneys who are looking to make the switch to appellate litigation if they only have trial-level litigation background? Are there resources for women of color who are past the law school stage to tap into networks to build a support system to pursue appellate litigation?
That's a good question. A couple of thoughts. I would try as much as you, I don't know what kind of practice the person who asked the question has exactly, but try as much as you can to get as much writing experience as you can. It doesn't matter if it's not an appellate brief as such. Dispositive motions in the trial court are very similar to appellate briefs in a lot of ways. I would practice those skills, make sure you have some writing samples that can help you when you apply to an appellate job. And I would be happy to talk to you if you want to email me. But I think the writing experience is really important, because even if you haven't done work that is strictly appellate, you can talk about your experience with writing, and that's really, and legal research and all of that. And that's really what or arguments in court. All of that is going to serve you well in moving to appellate work.
If I could just quick add, I agree with Shilpa. The writing is the #1 skill that you have to work on. And if you're struggling with it, get help on it. But, if you're mid-career or you're still a young attorney and you're figuring out what to do, talk to people who do appellate work in different kinds of places. We all have very different backgrounds. So you could talk to firms, you could talk to government entities, people who are prosecutor or public defender appellate offices. And if you have people in your current practice or your law firm or your group that do appellate work, but that's not what you do, see if you can volunteer to work on something and get some experience. Maybe you're in, the trial division of whatever public defender office, but there's somebody that does appeals. Oh, can I take on writing a point heading, or can I help you with this brief? So just trying to see where you can get experience where you are as well. And that might help jumpstart you.
Yeah, just to add on to that, if you are at a firm, I think a great way to get writing experience, especially if you aren't getting it in another way, is to do pro bono work, to seek it out. You can get a lot of responsibility on a pro bono case, maybe more than a young attorney would on a paying case at a law firm. So that's a great way not only to do good and interesting work, but also to build your resume.
Thank you all. I know we're almost out of time, so just one last question to all of you. If you were to give one piece of advice to an aspiring appellate attorney, what would you say?
I will pay forward the advice that I got, which is actually at a time when I was thinking about applying to the court, to clerk for Justice Sotomayor, and thinking that I wasn't good enough, or I didn't have the resume, I didn't have the right background, which is don't take yourself out of the running. That decision was for the justice to make, not for me. My job was to, submit my materials and be sort of the best lawyer that I could be. And I think about that sort of constantly for other opportunities. It's still advice that I apply to this day. And so I would say to sort of young women of color out there who are in law school or just starting their careers, just don't take yourself out of the running. Don't think that you're, not qualified, don't have the right type of writing experience, the right type of whatever experience for the job that you want to go for. Just go for it.
I completely agree with that. I would say, oh, sorry, did I just cut someone off? I would say, yes, don't take yourself out of the running. And I think that relates to how to deal with imposter syndrome and a lot of the things we've been talking about. I mean, just because you don't see people like you doing the kind of work you want to do, just because you don't have, I didn't have an appellate clerkship. I didn't know I wanted to do appellate work. I had a district court clerkship. And, if for a while I was like, well, who's going to hire me to do appellate work when I didn't do an appellate clerkship, especially in DC where it's a dime a dozen people who did appellate and Supreme Court clerkship. So I would say, don't let that stop you. You can do a lot more than you think.
Go ahead, Tiffany.
I think that's the best advice, is like, don't take yourself out of the running. There's so many jobs that, including clerking at the Supreme Court, where when I was first asked about it, I said no. And candidly, I said no because I thought there's no way I'll be successful at that. There's no way I'll get hired. And obviously that was wrong. So don't count yourself out. And also, I would say, don't be afraid we talked a lot about mentoring. There are so many people that have such great advice. Don't be afraid to reach out to people. You never know sort of which one of the people you reach out to could change your life, could get you that next job. And so just don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Let all of us know who are already practicing what you want to do, what your goals are, and reach out. And most of us will respond, and those conversations are helpful, and you never know where they might take you. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there.
Yeah, I 100% agree with all of that advice. And just so as not to repeat, I'll just add, try, if you're in law school, if you're still a student, try things, try it. There's so many moot court programs, within your school, competitions with other schools, whatever it is, try it and see if you like it. And do the best you can do to excel academically. And even if you're, not in school anymore, but you're a practicing lawyer and whatever your field is, just keeping the best you can wherever you are and whatever you're doing. And that excellence will come through and that will show and that will bring people to you, either through your employment or other people that you meet. They will recognize that. And, there's a lot of opportunities in appellate law, but in some traditional appellate paths, there's still an outsized emphasis on good grades and all of that. So if you're still a student, keep working to excel. But don't be afraid to try things and put yourself out there. Like everyone said, you'll just never know until you're out there. So good luck to everyone. And certainly I think for all the panelists, I'm happy, I don't know, can't speak for all the panelists, but I'm happy to have anyone who needs, would like to contact me personally. My email could be provided to anyone who would like to reach out.
Thank you all so much for being part of this conversation. There are so many messages in the chat sending you all love and thanking you for making them feel seen and heard. So I hope this is only the start of the conversation. A huge thanks again to APABA-DC and all the bar associations who sponsored this and put it together. And it's been a pleasure.